أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Okay, I welcome you all to our fourth lesson. We have so far covered Surah Al-Fatiha, Surah Al-Fil and Surah Al-Quraysh, Surah Quraysh, and today we're planning to do Surah Al-Maa'uun and Inna A'tainaka Kawthar as well, inshallah. Okay, so it's just a brief recap of what we did previously. I think one of the significant verses from Surah Al-Fatiha that I want to highlight is Maliki Yawmiddin, means Master of the Day of Judgment. And there, Deen was translated as the Judgment Day or the Final Day or the Day of Reckoning. Now that's a theme that's going to come out in the next surah as well. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. The Deen is mentioned once more in the surah we're going to cover today. Then if you look at the previous two surahs we've covered, in Surah Al-Fil, the essential theme there was basically one of defeating arrogance or a tyrant dictator that wanted to make an alternative place of prayer in Yemen, although he was motivated more by the economics rather than the religious reason for building that particular shrine or place of worship. And in any case, he came with this group of elephants, and the whole plan that they had put into place came to zero right on the doorstep of the Kaaba, almost 5 kilometers away, after doing something like almost 1,500 kilometers. And the last 5 kilometers is when this whole plan went astray completely. So this is the surah about that particular tyrant, Abraha, and what he wanted to do and how he failed. What is also significant about this is that although this is an onslaught on the Kaaba itself in Mecca, there's no specific mention of the Bayt or the house or the Kaaba itself in this particular Surah Alam Tara. If you look at the next surah, which is Quraysh, which is the people that were the custodians of the Kaaba, it describes them saying that you, O Quraysh, the people of those different tribes that form the Quraysh tribe, you had many, many agreements in place, and you were able to do many trips in the north and south, winter and summer. And after saying that as the introduction, the main message is فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. In other words, worship sincerely the Lord of this particular house, reference to the Kaaba. And also, who's the Lord? It's also the one who has fed you. In other words, the word from ta'am, at'amahum, fed you from hunger, and also gave you security in terms of from fear. So if you look at the word food, ta'am is coming out in a verb form in this particular surah. Ibadah or abud is to do with the worship, the idea of praying and worshipping. And salah will be mentioned in the next surah. And also about being safe from fear, which was one of the bounties blessed, the Quraysh were blessed with. Now, if we look at today's surah, Surah Al-Maa'uun, it essentially says there are 7 verses in the surah. It was revealed at Mecca, and the surah chastises as irreligious and mean all those who were withhold from the helpless and needy of the most basic forms of aid. Now, the word aid, as I've highlighted in yellow, is the word al-ma'un, and it has various connotations. It can also mean alms or charity, alms giving, charity in general, just an act of common kindness, helping others and securing their needs, looking at neighborly needs or neighborly assistance, and very, very mundane things of common use. In other words, you need to be able to be a human being in the broader sense of the word and give this kind of aid to whoever requires it. The surah also describes some characteristics of a person who denies the judgment or the day of accountability, the deen that I talked of, Maliki Yawmiddin from Surah Al-Fatiha. So in a nutshell, this surah says, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Now the word ra'a, if you remember, means to see. And just to go back, I showed you this word tara, alam tara, have you not seen? You see the word see there. Also, if you look at all right, so that verb tara is coming forth again here in ara'aita. And the same verb here, it's in another form, yura'una. In other words, someone who wants to be seen. So it's the same verb that we're seeing for the third time in our study so far. So this one says, have you seen the one who, alladhi is the one who, kadhaba is to deny or to reject or to go against, yukadhibu, the deen. Now the deen can mean two things. One is the deen of Islam, is a monotheistic creed of Islam, or the other broader sense of the word deen is the day of judgment, or the fact that you're going to pay at the end, or the day of accountability where book of deeds are going to be measured and weighed, and you're going to be given your reward for whatever good you've done, and you'll be shown the evil of whatever evil you might have committed in your lives. So this is the first verse is asking a question. Have you seen the one who continuously denies? That's the present tense. Yukadhibu, the ya in front shows the present tense. He continuously denies the religion or the day of judgment. Then generally, because you're referring to a human being here in this one, where you say, have you seen the one who denies the religion? It could have continued in the next verse, alladhi, that is the one who, again, distances himself from the yatim. And yatim, is the one who is the orphan, or who repulses the orphan, or who chastises the orphan, or pushes away the orphan. So the person who's got this characteristic, who denies the religion or the day of accountability, he finds it easy to do the following actions, which is, the first action is he repulses or keeps a distance from the orphan. That's one deed. When you don't when you deny the day of accountability. And the second deed that person is guilty of is wala yahuddu. Hadda yahuddu is to, and does not encourage ala, about the food, the ta'am of the miskin, of the poor. Right? And miskin is talking of one poor person, not masakin, which is a plural. So it's saying that this person not only repulses the orphan, he also does not encourage the feeding or giving of food to one poor person, not even many, but just one. Right? So this is the three characteristics given of the kafir, essentially. He denies the religion, denies Islam, and he doesn't do these two things, looking after the yatim and looking after the poor. Then it goes on to say, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. Now this is a very, very heavy way of condemnation or curse being thrown on another group of people. And this happens to be the musallin, in other words, people who perform the salah as we know it. الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. Now it's just not ordinary prayers of the salah. It's talking of those who, in terms of their prayer, are sahun. Sahun means very heedless or forgetful, or don't worry about it, or don't take it seriously enough, or miss it very, very easily without feeling any sense of remorse about it. So that's the one category of the musallin. That is the one who sort of just is forgetful about the prayer, which is an essential pillar of Islam. Then on top of it, the person who prays the salah in this format, that is alladhina hum yura'una. In other words, he stands up in prayer with the intention of being seen by others, or being complimented by others, or being spoken well of by others. In other words, doing it for show. Doing the salah, which is an act of ibadah with you and your master, but you're doing it more so that people can say, oh, what a great musalli this is, or what a great person he is. He performs his salah so in such a sort of humble way. So if you're doing it out of wanting to be seen by others and being complimented for it, then actually this wail is going to fall on you. In other words, this curse of your salah being prayed in this manner is going to bounce back on you. Also, it goes on to say that that person who performs the salah not only wants to be seen of others, but he also does another big sin, which is yamna'un al-ma'un. Now, mana means to forbid or to discourage somebody from doing something, and the ya and the waw noon to show it's plural, where this is also plural and this is also plural, and musallin is also plural. So all this is a plural form referring to the kind of salah persons who pray salah, that who don't, they are heedless of their prayer, they want to be seen by others, and also they discourage the giving of even just the small or insignificant neighborly needs of others in the community around them. So, although they say this is a Makkah revelation, we know that salah was made compulsory only in the 10th year after the call. In other words, after the first revelation was revealed on the cave of Hira. So when the Prophet ﷺ was 40, it was only more or less at the age of 50. In other words, 10 years after receiving the message of the Quran, did the gift of the Mi'raj, and the salah was made compulsory on the people in Makkah, the small band of Muslims that had converted at the time. Then if you look at the last 3 years before the Hijrah, which is now from his age of 50 to 53, were the very, very tiresome years for the Prophet and his immediate family. It was a lot of hardship. This was the time when the onslaught of the Quraysh against these small band of Muslims was very, very severe, to such an extent that they started an economic boycott on the group of Muslims. They even chased them out of their houses, and they had to live in a little suburb on the outskirts of Makkah. And they really went through such hardship that they literally had to eat leaves and twigs and roots of plants in order to survive this ordeal. And this was the time when the Prophet ﷺ also lost two stalwarts of his movement, Abu Talib, as well as his beloved wife, Khadija radiallahu anha. So it was a very, very trying time. And in this period of the Muslims' existence was the fact that there was no salah in congregation. In other words, salah was done individually. You prayed on your own, because anytime you got into a group, you were liable to more hardship being faced by the onslaught of the Quraysh on you. So, in a sense, the Mufassirun say that this particular half of the surah was only revealed in the Medina period, although it's given a Mecca, sort of revealed at Mecca as it were, but because the Musallin, the people that were praying in a sort of gathering in a place of worship, that only came about after the Hijrah. So after the Hijrah, we know that when the Prophet and Abu Bakr reached the outskirts of Medina at a place called Quba, they built the very first mosque. And that is when the first congregational prayer was prayed. And then a few months later, he then went with his camel into Medina, and it so happened that he allowed the camels to go loose, and where the camels would stop is where he would set up his camp. And it so happened that the camels stopped at the houses, or rather at the plot belonging to two orphans. Now, this is the issue about orphans as well, coming out in this surah, as well as the link to the whole, that incident of where the Masjid al-Nabawi was actually erected. So the Prophet ﷺ, when the camels stopped there, he then sought the permission of those who owned that particular plot of land, which happened to be these orphans. He purchased it from them, and then he built his little house and a little place of worship next to it, the Masjid al-Nabawi as we know it in its very first days. So, in essence, this last 4 verses, from verse 4 to verse 7, is talking about a category of worshippers who were in that time Muslim by name, and some of them who came to pray the salah in the Masjid al-Nabawi, but they came with the intention that they were actually not really firm in their hearts about belief. So when they came to pray, they prayed in a very heedless way, in a very slapdash it and run, quick kind of way. So their salah wasn't important, but they came there more to show that they were praying. They were forgetful in their prayer as well. They also wanted to be seen of others to be regarded as Muslims. But at the bottom of it all is they also did this the sin of Yamna'un al-Maa'uun, in other words, not giving even the small, insignificant acts of deeds of charity. So, what this surah is about is essentially this first category, the first three verses here, is about the kuffar and the Quraysh in Makkah. Then, if you look at these last four verses, was a reference to the Munafiqun in Medina in the later period of the Medina period, in the last 10 years of the Prophet's life, who were there performing prayers for show. It also refers to the Meccans, the Quraysh, that actually, while they controlled the Kaaba, they also controlled basically the purse strings of the actual income that was received by passing travelers. For those who actually came to worship their idols in and around Makkah, they paid also a fee. And all the Quraysh did at that time was they gave them water to drink from the well of Zamzam. And they kind of did what was they thought was their duty. And even when they came to pray in front of the Kaaba, the Quraysh at that time came there more to put up a show, to show others that, you know what, we are here, we are in charge, we are in control, we have the power, and we pray and you can see us praying. So they were like paying lip service to the idea of what worship really meant. And this is a condemnation of them in this particular surah. Allah talks about it very clearly that, do you not see these are the ones who just didn't accept Islam? They're still on the way of the mushrikeen and on the way of kufr. And essentially, if you look at these brand of Quraysh also, if you look at it, they did worship in an Allah of sorts. They did sort of worship, or rather believe in the fact that there were prophets before, having heard of these stories from the Jews and the Christians of the day. But the main thing they didn't do was didn't submit to Islam. In other words, didn't submit wholeheartedly, like lock, stock, and barrel, in other words, with their minds, their brains, and their hearts, and then with their actions to what Islam demanded of them. So they were always of this category that they denied and rejected the religion of Islam and they rejected the accountability, because accountability is the one thing they could not sort of accept of what the Islamic faith preached. And this is essentially the two messages of Islam in that early days of the Meccan period, which is belief in the oneness of Allah, and secondly, belief in the day of accountability or the day of judgment at the end of it all. So these were the two concepts they denied and rejected outrightly. And then on top of it, this is what they did to people. If you look at verse 2 and 3, is that they were the rich and the arrogant and the power and the might, and those with might in the Quraysh of Makkah were the ones that control the purse strings of the sort of central treasury of the day. And when it came to dealing with the orphan and the poor, they just shrugged them away, dealt with them in a harsh way, used a stick to push them aside, and they showed their power and their arrogance in this way by dealing with the very poor and downtrodden of society in this particular repulsive way, which is in verse 2 and 3. And then obviously in the show of belief, they even did the salah, or their prayer, which was not salah of the time, but in a way to show off that they are also praying. But the main thing is they refuse to give small acts or do small acts of charity and kindness. So this is essentially the surah, and let's go into a bit more detail. So if you look at the previous surah, which was Surah Quraysh, there Allah gives the Quraysh kind of positive reinforcement. He's telling them that, you know what, we have blessed you in so many ways. We were able to make you do your treaties amongst your tribes, allowed you to travel north and south without fear of being hijacked or being robbed of your goods, allowed your economy to thrive, made Makkah the center of the economy as well, or in terms of the straight trips. So that was positive reinforcement to the Quraysh, just telling them that, you know what, considering all these favors I've given you, all you must do is فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ, and worship the Lord of this house. And that is the one thing they never did. Without fear of being hijacked or being robbed of your goods. Sorry about that. Are we still okay? All right. So coming back to this one, in this particular surah, this is a surah that's very negative, it's very hard-hitting. It depicts the social corruption of the Quraysh, right? Where they had the financial power, but they abused their authority, right? So in a sense, this is a rhetorical question. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي, talking about the one person. Have you seen the one who denies the religion? It could be a reference to one of any of these kuffar that were inveterate disbelievers. It could be Abu Lahab, the treasurer of the Quraysh. It could be Al-Wa'il. It could be Abu Jahl, Al-Walid ibn Mughira. All these people were very, very wealthy Quraysh members of different tribes. They had their wealth, they controlled the purse strings, but still were very, very harsh to both the poor people, the vulnerable, and the impoverished of the society of the time. Now, yukadhibu means they kept on doing it or denied it all the time. And this is about deen, about religion, the belief that comes from the heart and the mind, right? And then the deen is also, there's like a saying, kamata dinu tudan, as you deal with others, so you will be dealt with. So basically, whatever you do of good will also come to you. But whatever evil you do, evil will also be shown to you. So, kamata din, as you will do to others, you will be done with in a like manner. Now, this is a problem in society where you can believe in a religion. In other words, you can pay lip service, but still indulge in crimes and do sin. And the only time you actually do sin and crime is when you don't believe in the day of judgment. In other words, if you don't believe in the payback day or that final day of accountability, actually you do as you please and you do as you like, and you can deny it for all you want to, but Allah is making a statement here that, remember, I am Maliki Yawmiddin. I am the master or the owner of that particular day of judgment. So if you deny the afterlife, you can actually live for the day and do as you please. Right? And if you disbelieve, then you'll find it's easy to be harsh on orphans. You can be very, very, you can have criminal intent. You can do sin upon sin. And your public life can be all in a mess. You can go into drugs and do a whole lot of other things, all because you don't believe in an afterlife, that your body is an amana and you're going to be accountable for it. Your health is an amana, and how you're going to account for it when you had it good and well. Right, then it goes on, فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدْعُ الْيَتِيمَ. Now, you see, look at how the Quran talks of, like I said, you could have ignored this فَذَلِكَ, and the sentence could still make sense, where, have you seen the one who denies the religion? That is the one who, الَّذِي يَدْعُ الْيَتِيمَ, who repulses or pushes back the orphan. But here, by putting the ذَلِكَ in front of الَّذِي, is trying to create a distance, saying that the one who actually indulges in the sin is actually, it's not saying who, just it's saying that is the one who. It's showing you creating a distance between you and what you're supposed to really be, right? And so that's the word dhalika coming in to show that is the one who, right? And da'a is to be pushed, and the angels that are going to be pushing people into heaven are also going to be using the same verb, that is to push into the fire of Jahannam. So when you're pushing an orphan today, remember one day is going to be your turn where you're going to be pushed into a severe punishment that you will regret for all times. Right? So yadu'u. Then we go on to hadda yahuddu, the other verb in this verse, and does not encourage the feeding of the poor. To make something rise means hadda, or to move on a good action, or to encourage something. Right, and also it talks of the ta'am, the food of it talks of one miskin, of one poor person. Right. Now the Prophet ﷺ was encouraged to look after the orphans. He himself was one. Now, if you look at the definition of an orphan and the way the linguists describe it, is somebody who loses both his parents before the age of puberty. So in other words, before reaching the age of 11 or 12, if both your father and mother have died, then technically you are referred to as an orphan. And we know the Prophet ﷺ was an orphan because his father died even before he was born, and his mother died 3 or 6 years later. So literally he was born as an orphan and brought up by his uncles, some of whom were kind to him and some were very, very harsh to him. So this is the life of the Prophet actually. His sunnah was that he was an orphan, and coming out of that particular environment, no other person in history advocated for the rights of orphans like he did. And the Quran is replete with examples of this, that you must encourage the feeding of the poor, giving your zakah, your sadaqah, etc. And if you don't do it, then wailul lil musallin, destruction be on those who pray. Very serious use of this word. And if I'm a musalli, it can even apply to me, and a'udhu billah, it mustn't apply to us, because we mustn't come to the musalla hoping that other people will see us or think how pious we are, or develop even a piety complex about the fact that we are regular musallis. So these thoughts mustn't come into our minds when we go to a public space to pray our salah. And also the word the ta'am is talking of the food of the needy, in others, not feeding, because feeding is an action requiring a lot of energy, because you have to make the food and all the rest of it, whereas just giving of food, where food is already prepared and all you have to do is just give that food over to another party. You can't even do that basic element of generosity. You can't even give over the ta'am that belongs to that miskin out there. Right? And then the word sahun, I'm sure you know that sometimes in our salah, when we are forgetful and we forget whether we read 3 rakats or 4 rakats, and we make up for it by the sajda of sahu, as it's called, the sajda of forgetfulness. Right? So sahu and sahun is from that root, and sahun is those who are heedless or forgetful. Right? And who would fall in this category is those who pray without concentration in their salah, or delay purposely to the last moment of each time of that salah. They try and read quickly because, they're always too busy, or they reluctantly perform it as merely as a duty that they had to do, right? With no devotion or khushu or concentration in it. Unfortunately, this is, sometimes our salah can be characterized like this, but hopefully this is not our salah and we are concentrating in our salah, trying to get the meaning. Right, and also I hope our salah is not like that salah that was described by the Prophet one day when the Sahabi was going up and down quickly in his salah, and told him, go and back and read, go and read it again, go and read it again. Now, it was he described that Sahabi's salah as if he was a bird trying to pick at pebbles on the ground. Like if you look at a bird or a chicken or a fowl or something on the ground, the way it would bend down to pick on something that it sees, and then it lifts his head up. Then before you know it goes down quickly and picks another piece of something up from the ground and lifts his head up. Our salah shouldn't look like that, as if we are picking something from the ground. Our salah should be one we take time and pride in presenting our salah to Allah Almighty. Okay, and then in the last few verses, it says, Alladhina hum an, not fi salatihim, but it's talking about those who, about their prayer. An is about, not fi. Fi would be engaged in. So here you're talking of salah as a meaningless ritual that you're just indulging in, right? When the word an is described, because you're talking about your salah, right? And basically, who are these categories of people? It is people like the Quraysh, the religious elite, who came to Kaaba just to show that they prayed. They stood very lazily, their hands were all over the show, they were looking all over the show. In terms of their spending also, they don't spend except disgustingly. And arrogance is unfortunately a very hard thing to spot, like a black spot on a black rock on a dark night. So Allah is the one that exposes you, or even us or anybody, for what we really are, because He knows what's in our hearts and minds at the time when we come to salah, and what we're doing it for and what intention we're making it for, right? And Allah exposes the quality of these people's prayer, and therefore we are encouraged to pray sometimes a farad salah in the mosque, and to pray the nafil and the sunnah and the extended nafil in your own home, so that you're not guilty of the showing off, tendency that people look at you and say, oh, so mashallah, you're praying so much and you pray so often and you're here so early and you go so late. That's not the idea of praying in a mosque. Your prayer should be one that you come there with a purpose, you do your purpose and go back and pray all the nafil and as many nafil as you like in the comfort of your home, where you're not showing it off to anybody else. Right? So there's two problems mentioned in the surah, that where you pray but you are horrible to others. Or on the other side, other extreme, sometimes you give charity and then you don't pray, and you don't pray properly. So, we got to control both these problems in our lives as well. So the main message is we are the hard-heartedness of the people of the Quraysh at the time, and even up to posterity, like even in today's time and age, you find people that cannot give even the smallest of charities, even to their neighbors. Now, the smallest of charities can be like sometimes, say, the neighbor runs out of sugar or salt, and the person knocks on your door and asks for that, and you need to give sometimes just a small cup full of it, and you find it hard to do it. Right? That could be one insignificant amount that you asked for. And I think we in South Africa, in the big cities, you find these beggars on every street corner as well. I think that's the point of it all, that, sometimes even an insignificant amount that we give, whether it's a 20 cents or 50 cents or 2 and 5 and whatever, or even a small packet of knickknacks or something that you have in your car, it's something that we need to encourage ourselves to give as much as we can, because this is the thing that we shouldn't forbid or encourage or discourage others from giving small acts or making small acts of charity. So if we carry on, maybe I just want to talk about this now. These are some additional notes I did to my set of notes, and this I'll also share with you at a later date. But, just this past week, reading more about the surah, I think I understood it even deeper than what I did from just Ustad Norman's lecture. So this particular one is talking about the other names of the surah, by the way, were Ara'aita, because Ara'aita is the first words of the surah, means have you seen, right? Now, some people even call this surah Ara'aita, in other words, the surah of have you seen the one who, right? And this Ara'aita alladhi or Ara'aita is used in other parts of the Quran, but this is the only surah where it starts off with that particular first word, right? Ara'aita. Others also call it's a surah of takdhib, from yukadhibu, or the one that denies things, right? So Surah Takdhib is also an apt name for this particular surah. I mentioned the fact about the Meccan's period 10th year after the call, and the fact that the Hijrah and then the mosque, I talked about that as well. Some people say that this particular surah was revealed at a time when Abu Sufyan, before he converted to Islam and became a Sahabi in his later life period, when he was still a non-Muslim at the time, he was a very wealthy person. And there was an occasion when he slaughtered 2 camels in front of people. He distributed it for show and for acknowledgement of other people around him. And on one occasion, while he did this distribution and this cutting of these 2 camels, which was actually for charity, but funny enough, when an orphan came to him while he was giving out this meat, he actually took a stick and pushed an orphan away. Now, imagine what kind of a deed this is. Like, you're doing sometimes a good act of slaughtering 2 camels, and imagine how much of meat that thing gives you, and you're giving it out to the rich and the famous around in your community. But when a poor orphan comes to you, you push him away with a stick. Now, this is a surah that sort of admonished him in particular in this particular context, prior to him accepting Islam, and telling him that, you pushed an orphan away. How does that make sense? How do you justify your generosity or your good action when an orphan comes and one who's desperately in need of food, you actually chase that person away? It just doesn't make sense, right? So that's the one incident. The other one was in an incident of another inveterate foe of Islam, Walid ibn Mughira. While it was not mentioned by name, but it was a serious reminder to all the people around that Walid ibn Mughira was a very, very famous Qurayshi. He understood the Quran or understood Arabic poetry like nobody else did. And when he heard the Quran, he actually deep down in his heart agreed that, this is something truly magnificent, something sublime. No poet can match this thing. But when he wanted to articulate that, weakness got the better of him. And when he went to Abu Jahl on one occasion to tell him, this Quran is magnificent, Abu Jahl told him, if you're going to talk to the people of the Quraysh like this, you're going to convert them to Islam, which is something we don't want to have happen. So please go back and think about this Quran thing again carefully. And there's a few verses in the Sajjad Surah, in another surah, where Allah describes Walid ibn Mughira on that occasion when he was told to think about what this Quran is and how he's going to come back out and tell the people what it is. So he thought about it and he contemplated and he kind of agreed. But when he went out, somehow he just got cold feet. And what he mentioned to the people in the public was that, you know what, this is magical words. It's coming from the heart of like a magician is capable of this kind of language, and a poet sublime is this kind of a person. So he in other words, he didn't accept the Quran for what it was, the miracle it was in the public space, and forever after that he was actually, you know, he never accepted Islam, and this was his state. Somebody who could intellectually think well about the Quran, but couldn't get around to accepting the ad-Din, the message of Islam, and accepting the day of judgment. So he remained a kafir all his life. If you look at the link between Surah Quraysh and Ma'un, there's the word ta'am, which is the word relating to food in both surahs. Now, in the previous Quraysh surah, Alladhi at'amahum min ju, remember that verse, that Allah provided the food to the Quraysh, protecting them from hunger. And now in this surah, when the Quraysh are actually blessed, right, as was described in Surah Quraysh, they are told that, you know what, you are now blessed, that you've been given from the boundaries of Allah, but when it comes to feeding others around you now, why is it that you hold back? Why do you not feed others? Right? So Allah is describing the Quraysh to say, you know what, you guys are actually ungrateful. I've given you so much of, means and so much of food and so much of graciousness I've blessed you with food. And now when it comes to the poor and the miskin, you can't even give a small morsel or a small meal to the poor and downtrodden of the society, which is including your own tribes, your own people, your own families. So it's what a mockery you're making of this graciousness of Allah. Right? The Quran is saying, as a show of gratitude, at least do it to others, feed others, do it for the poor. Right? Then the second thing that the Surah Quraysh talked of, worship the Lord of this house. Right? But in this surah, he's describing the Quraysh, he's saying they're not worshipping the Lord of the house. In fact, they're denying religion. They're denying Islam. They're denying the day of accountability. And even in their prayer, they do it for show. So all in all, your worship is also contorted and warped. And Allah is showing you one way and you're doing it another way. Right? Then the last thing is, in Surah Quraysh, he reminded the Quraysh of the numerous blessings. He united warring tribes. He made the travel safe, easy. And you could, you take advantage of these blessings and share food, but instead you terrorize orphans, you push them around, you bully them. So you ignored ubudiyah, in other words, this concept of ibadah, of worship, in a very, very sublime way. Right? And this surah is warning them of the consequences of their crimes. Right? And he uses the word wailun, which is also a deep pit in fire, which is going to be meant for this category of people. Right, now I talked about the 3 verses and the 4 verses. And interestingly enough, the disbelievers are very, very clear. Now, if you look at Surah Baqarah, the first few verses there, 5 ayat describe the believers, next 2 describe the disbelievers, and the 13 ayah after that describe the hypocrites, which is like a special category or group of people. And on top of it, Allah gives even 2 examples of how you can identify these hypocrites in communities. So if you look at the proportion of the verses in this surah also, the first 3 verses are just about the disbelievers, a clear-cut case. The next 4 is about the hypocrites, which needs a bit more description, and therefore 3-4 traits are actually described in them. Right? And I think if you look at other surahs like Surah Humaza, which we're going to study later in Ramadan, inshallah, that the Humaza is the ones who gather together and collect their wealth, and then they do backbiting and slander against the poorer segments of society that have no voice. Right? Then if you look at Al-Hakumut Takathur as well, that is to do with people amassing wealth and wanting more and more riches. And this accumulation of wealth sort of consumes them to such an extent that they get distracted from the higher things of worshipping Allah the way He should be worshipped. Right? So Araita is that, have you seen, or listen up, I'm going to describe the one who belies the religion, and then he goes a description of the deen. talked about Walid ibn Mughira as well already, and ad-din is to do with accountability and what holds them back and the violating the rights of the orphan. All right, now, one of the incidences in the life of the Prophet was, where he took his four fingers and he says, one of the best deeds you can do for an orphan is to wipe your four fingers over the hair of an orphan, going from front to back and then back to front. In other words, showing some sort of respect and kindness and mercy to a person in society that is like rejected and the downtrodden and the oppressed. Right? And this is a sunnah of the Prophet. So we should also be encouraged to do that. But the crime comes about is when you take the same hand that could have been sort of gentle on the head of an orphan, you actually use it to push the orphan away. In other words, you tell him he's not allowed. He's got no entry into this place. He's not allowed in your presence. You must stay far away. You must stay in this particular house or that place and don't come and mix with us because we are the elite of society. So when you do the pushing part, then the wailun is going to be basically on you. So we are encouraged to look after orphans rather than shunning the orphans. And also he mentioned in one other hadith, he put his two fingers together and says, the one who looks after an orphan and on the day of judgment, he will be with me like two fingers in Jannah. In other words, if you have done something like very, very good and a very, very notable deed like caring for an orphan, is even better than being a mujahid or one who prays the salah all night. Because here you're caring for a person who is like a voiceless person in the ummah or in the society, right? And we must never dishonor them to such an extent that if we are doing, say, an inheritance division, if a family member has died and say an orphan has to come there who's not even related to that family, the persons executing that will and inheritance should actually give a portion of that wealth to this particular orphan that came at that time. So even though it's not part of the bequest at the time, but as an act of kindness, this is the kind of generosity you should show to orphans, right? And on the other hand, if you eat that wealth or that inheritance unlawfully, you are eating a fire of hell in your belly. Now, this is very, very serious, right? I think that's the word wailun as well coming in here about the word fire of hell, because the Sahabis used to have such a sort of way with treating orphans that they used to share their food with the orphans. But when the verse was revealed about not eating the whatever is belonging to the orphans, they then separated their plates. In other words, they kept their portions separate so that what was they're going to eat is separate from what the orphan was to have eaten, to ensure that they got their just portions. But they found that, and the Sahabis were so worried about ad-din, this day of accountability, that they were scared of even on one day taking perhaps one morsel of food that was belonging to an orphan and eating it by mistake, consuming something that was not legally yours. The Sahabis were very, very concerned about this. So when they were separating the plates and all, they found it just wasn't working. So they went to the Prophet and said, it's actually difficult for us to separate the plates. And then in another verse in Surah Baqarah was revealed where they were told that people in charge of orphans, you're allowed to mix your food, but keeping in mind that Allah knows what you're consuming, who is doing right, is the right proportions, and who is doing wrong. So your accountability will come in at the end anyway. So just do the right thing and have this taqwa that one day you're going to face Allah and you're going to be accountable for every morsel of food that went into your stomach. Right? Then it goes on further. It says, if you have to give a share from your wealth every year from zakah and sadaqah, the only people that find it hard to do it is those who disbelieve, because for them, there's no accountability day. So if you believe in an accountability day, giving zakah and sadaqah should be a pleasure, should be something you look forward to and shouldn't be a burden on you. Okay. Then also, I think many of our relief organizations say sponsor an orphan, and it costs sometimes maybe something like 100 rand a month or something. I think this is something so basic, and if all of you, or whoever of you can afford it, please do it. I think it's a very, very noble deed that is encouraged in the surah. Please sponsor that orphan so that even if you can't look after an orphan in your house, you know that somebody else is looking after one, and at least part of that responsibility is off your shoulder. Right? Now, the word Ma'un, now, this is another way of remembering Ma'un, and I'm just going to use this plate as an example. In Iraq, some of the Arabs use the word Ma'un to refer to a plate. Now, a plate is very important because, a plate is characteristic of that little act of charity that we're talking of, the small acts of kindness. Because for some people in this world, unfortunately, those who are very, very deep in poverty, they don't even afford what is symbolically like what we talk of as a plate, right? Leave alone what should be on the plate. In other words, they don't have any crockery and cutlery, whereas some of us who are blessed, we've got many of these and quite a big variety of it. And on top of it, we've also got the food that goes on top of the plate. And those people don't have even one morsel that can sit on the plate. So all in all, if you think of Ma'un as a plate, that could sort of, jolt your memory to think that, Alhamdulillah, I've been blessed in such a fine way. I can almost choose the kind of chicken I want, whether it's organic chicken or this chicken or that chicken, and I can buy what I like, and I can even afford prawns one day or this something else, and yet there's so many many of people that are poor and in desperate need of just even that one meal of the day or living below the poverty line to that extent. So we need to, out of the day of judgment, accountability concept that must be ingrained in our mind, we must think of the poor at all times by keeping this word Ma'un as a plate in front of us as a reminder. All right, now, if you look at the word sadaqah as well, in Surah Tawbah, there's a verse that says, "Innama sadaqatu lil fuqara wal masakin." So whenever fuqara and masakin are mentioned separately, they actually mean two different things. But when miskin or masakin is mentioned on its own, it covers the word fuqara, right? Now, the fuqara are people, or a fakir is one who is very, very poor. Now, in symbolic terms, if you look at your spine and what it does to your body, it controls all your organs and all your limbs and movement and say if there's a problem on your spine anywhere along that section of the spine, and you don't get the use of your hands or your legs or your head or your brain or whatever, there's a derailment somewhere in your body. The word fakir comes from that kind of thing, where that person in society is kind of derailed from society. In other words, he owns absolutely nothing, whereas society is, in motion and working and earning and living a life sometimes. But that poor fakir is in another, like an orbit of his own, where his movement is like curtailed. He's almost like on a wheelchair. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know where his next meal is coming from. So the fakir is that kind of a person, right? Where he's got a level of poverty and with it dependence on others, and he cannot move freely, and something is broken in him. So this is the level of your dependence on others, and miskin has got that connotation as well. Now, some of us are blessed where we've got wealth, where we can belong to sports clubs and gyms and do, spend generously in many, many sort of good causes. But somehow we do sometimes that where people notice, and then when it comes to the poor, we get very selfish and niggardly, that we don't want to sort of indulge in that side of things, right? Now, the message to that group of people is, please reassess. All of us must reassess our priorities. What is more important, right? And sometimes also we shouldn't give to a mosque or a madrasa or an orphanage or some sort of good cause, but then you're trying to make your haram earnings halal in the process. I mean, Allah does not need of any of this haram type of charity that sometimes we give to show and just to clear our, make something that's haram halal. So we should also avoid this, right? Also, if you forget your salah now and then for a valid reason and you show remorse after it, it's no problem. As long as you still have that fear of accountability and the fact that you made your niyyah for that salah in a good way and you do it for a good reason, right? Now, okay, let me maybe just speed up a bit. I'm just looking at the time. So essentially, this surah talks of three things where your heart is involved, your tongue is involved, and your limbs are involved. Right? Your heart is what you think and what you believe. So, in other words, your deen, your Islam, and your day of accountability, the heart is involved at that level. And then, in terms of your tongues and your limbs is like your hands. What you do with your hands? Do you shrug away an orphan, or do you actually caress his head gently, showing mercy to the person? Also, what do you do with your tongue? How do you deal with these oppressed people? Do you deal with them in a sympathetic way, or are you harsh with your tongue in the way you talk to them, the way you deal with them, and maybe the derogatory terms we might use for them? How do we use our tongues when we describe these people that are oppressed people in society? Right? And we need to make a stand in terms of the needy and the oppressed people. Right? That other part is also important, that if you look at the five pillars in terms of the Surah Al-Maa'uun, it talks about the poor and the needy in the first few verses, and then talks of the musalli and the musallin. So it almost focuses our attention on the depressed and the oppressed peoples first, rather than the salah that comes in later, which is also important and an important pillar of Islam. But in other words, the focus is on humanity first before your individuality. In other words, the focus is on civil service of your own, and then the salah that comes in place to keep that civil service of yours in place. Also about the fact that, when the Prophet ﷺ entered Medina, what he did first was he made bonds of brotherhood between the Muhajirun and the Ansar. The Muhajirun are those that came penniless from Makkah with him on the Hijrah, and the Ansar were the helpers of Medina that accepted Islam at the point. So there was something there that we had to deal with. People, he worked on the improving of relationships with people first, and the salah obviously came in as something to further strengthen this bond of brotherhood that should ensue. On one occasion, also a very tough guy came, and Sahabi came, big guy came and asked the Prophet ﷺ for advice. What should he do? And the Prophet gave him this advice. He says, run your hand over an orphan's head and feed the miskin. Right? And two basic things. In other words, you might be a big-sized guy and well-fed and, having all the necessities of life, but what your duty is then to run your hand over an orphan's head. In other words, always identify with them and feed them at all times. Right? I think these other things we talked of previously. So, it's only a dead heart that can, look at a person in a condescending manner. So this one is drawing the attention that look at the person who has the audacity to deny the day of judgment. Right? So they continuously reject. And we did mention that the bulk of the surahs of this time was about Allah and the accountability on the day of judgment. And it's only if you show sympathy that sympathy will be shown to you in return. And encouraging the feeding of the poor takes you out of a selfish mode, and you want to do for others, and in that way uplift society. And doing good is what is encouraged of us. But we also have to be careful, because we shouldn't pray heedlessly and not have concentration in our salah. So the ma'un is the smallest act of kindness, or the smallest utensil, or the smallest act of kindness that you can give. And the newspaper The Guardian did a research study, and found that the Muslims in the UK had turned out to be one of the most generous communities. Because I think our religion encourages us to be generous at all times. And I remember back in the day when I was teaching at a school also, I had a Hindu teacher friend of mine. He told me, what he finds amazing about us Muslims is that when we want to put up a project or do an act or help in some relief agency work kind of action, we get galvanized very, very quickly. Whereas with us in the Hindu community, we don't we don't, we somehow people are not so generous. They just don't give so freely. So I think it's a good thing if we are like this research is showing us, that we've got this act of generosity and kindness embedded in us. And I think the zakah, being a fundamental pillar of Islam, brings this social consciousness and awareness about the poor and the needy in our society, that we need to do this on a regular basis. And also the sadaqah and other acts of charity is also encouraged. So basically, we need to have unity between our belief and our action. Our iman and our amal must go together. And our rituals are there to encourage us to do civic duties as well. And everything is connected. And Allah, the Prophet ﷺ was sent as a mercy, rahmah lil alameen. And sincerity is very, very important. Okay, so in conclusion, if you look at what I've been asking you to do always, is look at both the English and the Arabic side by side. Make sure you memorize it. If you've got a sort of a photographic memory, make a photographic note of all these words and what each thing means and how it applies to each of us and what we should be changing in our lifestyle and doing differently going forward. And Allah must actually encourage us, like we shouldn't be the ones that deny religion or deny Islam and deny the Day of Judgment. Because if we deny it, then actually we become like everybody else. We live for the day. Your life is your life, and you don't believe in the Day of Judgment. So therefore, you can do as you like and do as you please and lead your life the way you want to. But that's not the life of ours. We accept Islam, and as a result, we also accept the Day of Judgment. So we should look after the orphan, look after the poor, make sure our prayer is not heedless and forgetful. And we shouldn't be one doing it out of show. And very, very important, don't discourage or prohibit others also from doing small acts of kindnesses, because it's the small acts of kindnesses that each of us do that we need to be aware of, and inshallah Allah guide us. Let's end off by Wal Asr, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilus salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr.